So to export your textures from Substance and then import them to Maya, what you have to do is go to File. Once you're finished, you can go File, Export Textures. It's going to open up this window over here. And then all you have to change is just make sure that your output directory is actually a folder where you're going to be storing your textures. So I'm going to click over here, and then I'm going to look for, or I'm going to create a new folder for this project. Right here I have this textures folder. I'm going to make another one for my pins, and I'm going to name it pin_txt. I'm going to select the folder, and it's going to be shown right here. Right. Next, right, we just click export, and that's going to take our materials out from Substance and turn them into images that we can later import into Maya. Now in Maya, now we have our model rigged, I'm first going to set up a 3-point light setup to illuminate my scene and then import my materials. So I go over to, I'm just going to make a plane so that I have a floor to have my light bounce off of. You can also make something like a stage by using a cube, but you know, it's a bit more work. Freeze transform. And then I'm gonna add 3 lights, and I'm gonna be using the Arnold render engine. So I'm gonna go over to Arnold Lights, and I'm gonna be using area lights for this exercise. Now area lights, they behave like real world lights. The direction by which they shine is literally this line over here. So anything behind it is not gonna get illuminated by my area light. I'm just gonna position this more or less. And since I mentioned we're gonna be using a 3-point light setup, 3-point lights, literally we have 3 main lights in our scene. We have the first one over here, which is our key light. This is gonna be the main light source for our render. I'm just gonna duplicate them directly like this by pressing Control D. Later we have our fill light. And the fill light, as the name implies, basically fills in shadows created by our key light. So it's going to be a bit less intense. Since I kind of already know more or less the position I want these to be, I'm first going to position the lights, and then I'm going to work with their intensities later on. You can also work either in the rendering workspace, but I prefer to use the modeling workspace, just in case, because it opens up my attribute editor, and it's going to be pretty relevant later on. So make sure I name these. This is my fill light. And then lastly, we have our rim or backlight. And the rim light, what it does is essentially either it helps enhance the silhouette of our object by literally just creating this halo of light behind it. This one might be a bit more intense if we want to get that effect going. And now that I have my lights, I'm going to create a camera to set up this render. So to create a new camera, we head on over to Panels, Perspective, and then New. And then this camera, I'm going to name it my render cam. So by default, I'm already at this camera. You can kind of see at the bottom that it says render cam right here. So I know I'm at that camera currently. And all I'm going to do here is just set up my position. I can turn on my resolution gate, which kind of helps me know where this render is going to be happening later on. So I'm just going to position my camera more or less over here. And if I don't want to mess up the position of this camera, I can just lock it by clicking this lock over here. Now, if I press render, you'll notice that you might not see much going on here, and that's because the lights aren't as intense. So I have to go into the properties of my lights. I'm going to pause this for now by clicking stop, and then I'm going to start with my key light. And I essentially, what I like to do, I'll basically overexpose the light. It's going to be like really bright all of a sudden, and then I tone it down. Here you can see what I mean. Right, they're pretty high, so I can tweak this value a little bit, better illuminate my scene, and I can essentially duplicate this for the other lights in my scene. So 10 works. Basically, I'm just gonna be using this value, gonna be lowering it by maybe a unit of 1 so that it's not as intense. So right now I have like 6 and 4, you know, just set that to 4 to keep it even. And 6.5, again, just to have like even units. It's not really that important. So here I could just have my fill light be 5 and its exposure set it around 3. You can kind of see that result. And then lastly, for the backlight, I might have to reposition it later on. But here I'm just gonna overdo it. Overexpose this one for sure, so that I get this effect behind my light. The beauty of this, I can later change colors, I can change the intensity depending on what I want to create later on. Now that I have these lights more or less set up, I'm gonna bring over my textures from Substance. So to make this a lot easier, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna head on over to my Windows settings and preferences and turn on my plugin manager. And I'm gonna look for the Substance plugins. I'm gonna make sure that these are all loaded and auto-loaded. So basically every time I turn Maya on, these already come pre-installed. They're right here. You know it worked if you see it right over here, so you can close this window. Go to Substance, and then we're gonna apply workflow to maps. Now, over here, make sure that your workflow is set to Arnold. And when we select multiple maps, one thing I'm going to recommend, since we're not working with a real world scale, is not to plug in the height map, because that might break your model. So go to our folder where we have these textures. I'm going to select the base. If I hold control, I can add to my selection. I'm going to select the metallic. I'm going to select the normals and the roughness. And this one, the mixed AO, I'm going to have to reapply it later, because the names don't match. So if I leave it selected and then I press select, you'll notice that the ambient occlusion isn't connected. That's because they don't have the same name for this to work. It has to say ambient occlusion, but you could plug it in manually by just clicking on the folder and then selecting it, and then you press select and apply. And then to actually add our material to our object, we have to select it, hold right click, and then assign existing material, and it's gonna generate this AI standard surface 1. We can change this name later, right? The material's applied. And then I'm gonna go over to the properties and make sure that this AI standard surface has a proper name. So this is gonna be pin_mat or mat. And when we render, gotta let those materials compile, we end up with this result. Essentially bringing over those materials from Substance to Maya. For this exercise, all you would have to do is once this finishes loading, you can go over to File and then Save Image, and then just export it as either a JPEG or a PNG. So this is just render example. I'm gonna throw this in my desktop for now. There we go. And that should be it for the rendering section.